Hi, what's going on guys? It's Almond. Welcome back to another Wizard101 video. In today's video, I kind of want to go over all the spell changes that happened in Test Realm the past couple days. I know that there's going to be more, but I wanted to cover all the ones that were predominantly focused on this week. So we have some fire spells, we have some storm spells, and one death spell that were changed. So I'm quickly go over them and show you guys what each change or like major change happened. So a lot of people don't have to like look up or go in game and test realm just to figure it out themselves. So let's start off with fire. So Brimstone was changed. The original Brimstone is basically the same thing. All they did was change the card art when it comes to the writing, and they also changed the pips. So they're trying to introduce the school pip mechanic, and now it went from 4 pips to 2 pips and a school pip. So even if you're a fire and you have 4 pips, you can't cast a spell. You have to have 1 power pip and 1 school pip. So you're kind of forced to use Archmastery in your favor to cast a spell. Burning Rampage was also changed. They actually changed how much damage it does as well, and they changed how the overtime detonate works. So before, Burning Rampage would hit, do 70 damage, and after 3 rounds it will detonate and do 700 damage. Now what it does, it still does a 70 damage on the initial hit, but it does a 780 overtime, but instead of 3 rounds detonation, it does it after 5 rounds. So you kind of have to wait 2 extra rounds, but the DOT is protected. So they added this new mechanic where the spells are basically protected, the overtime is protected. And yeah, that's kind of their whole strat. They're going for fire. And also the pips are changed too, so you need 3 pips and a school pip as well. Hephaestus was changed as well. They added the whole school pip mechanic into it as well, but the damage was changed to tier 3, 4, and 5. If you're using tier 1 or tier 2 Hephaestus, it's exactly the same other than the school pip, but they added extra damages to tier 3, tier 4, and tier 5. 5 damage increase on tier 3 and 4, while the 5th tier is 10 damage difference. So good mechanic that they added, I guess, for increased damage. Krampus was changed. The bottom path doesn't exist anymore, so you can't have a 55 mantle, which kind of sucks if you're trying to mantle spam. But the top path is changed as well. So original Krampus and the spell elemental paths are different. The top path does more damage than it used to. As you can see, it went from 335 to 375 to 440 and to 480, which is a big damage increase in my opinion. And the mantle is still the exact same on the top path. In course, they added the school pip as well, but the bottom path was completely reworked, and now instead of the 55 mantle and the less damage, what it does now is it detonates an overtime, and then it puts an overtime for 3 rounds, and it's protected, which does 525, depending on the tier, of course. Tier 3 does 525, while tier 2 does 510. Big change for Krampus, so no more minus 55 mantle spamming and praying for RNG, but we'll see how this goes. Nautilus Unleashed got a complete rework for the bottom path. Top path is relatively the same, and the pip cost was definitely changed as well. So before, tier 5 Nautilus was 6 pips, or it would be 5 pips and steal 2 charms. So the stealing 2 charms doesn't exist anymore. They completely removed that path, so now you only have Steel Blade and then do damage, or now they introduce a mechanic where it pushes 2 traps off of you to the enemy and puts a 400 protected overtime for 4 rounds. So it does a little bit less damage than the bottom path used to do, which was 630. So they nerfed the damage a bit, but it is protected in their case. And at the same time, they increased the rounds from 3 to 4. So we'll see how this goes for the bottom path, but a lot of people are probably going to be kind of mad that they removed the Steel 2 blades, because that's literally the reason why people use Nautilus, because of the reasoning of stealing 2 blades. That's why it was busted at the time. So we'll kind of have to wait and see what happens to Nautilus. Of course, they added the school pip as well. Most of these spells are going to have school pips when it comes to lore master spells. So just be on the wary of that. Detonate was changed as well, so it's no longer 1 pip. It's just changed to 0 pips. Pretty straightforward. Not much to add to that. Firecat was changed. It went from 2 pips to 1 pip, and this is of course the spell-elemented path, bottom path of course. And yeah, it does less damage because the pip cost was reduced to 1 pip instead of 2 pips, but it does still have the detonate. And yeah, big change in my opinion was Fire Elf. Fire Elf no longer puts an overtime on all enemies for the bottom path, which was kind of good for setting up stuff, But yeah, that bottom path does not exist anymore. What Fire Elf does do now is it puts an overtime for 3 rounds, and then it clears a shield and puts another overtime on the enemy for 120 damage for 3 rounds. So you can basically put 2 overtimes on the target, which is pretty good for setting up certain things. So I feel like Fire is becoming more of a DOT king with this spell. Elephant was changed as well. It used to do 655 damage at tier 5 and put a 270 overtime if the enemy had a shield. Now what Elephant does is removes 3 shields off the enemy, and it puts a 190 overtime that is protected for 5 rounds, and then it does an additional hit of 560. So I feel like there's some combos that are 100% doable with Elephant. So Elephant got a big buff in my opinion for the bottom path, just because you can clear 3 shields with it. Immolate was completely reworked as well when it comes to the bottom path. Top path still stays the same, but bottom path, instead of taking damage and then hitting and putting healing overtime on yourself, now what it does is it does damage to yourself, and it puts a protected overtime for 520 rounds on the enemy for 4 rounds, and it clears 2 traps to put another overtime on the enemy. So kind of like Elf, but a little bit better because it's a protected overtime and a regular overtime. So I can see some combos with Immolate, but at the same time you are taking damage on yourself, and it might cause some issues with that when it comes to setting up stuff. Phoenix bottom path was changed. It no longer does 550 damage and does increased damage depending on how many overtimes there are. Now what they did was Phoenix does damage, and then it puts a 360 time overtime healing on yourself, and that depends on how many DOTs are on the enemy. So if you have 2 DOTs, you're going to get 2 healing overtimes on yourself. So that's pretty good in my opinion, and it only goes up to 2. Sunbird no longer extends overtime. So if you are using like Scald, for example, or Elf, anything like that, it doesn't hit and then extends the overtime. It doesn't do that anymore. Now what it does is it hits, but if there's an overtime on the enemy, it does more damage. So instead of 260 for the initial hit, it does 450 if there's an overtime on the enemy. Blast Off got a big change as well. When it comes to Blast Off, it did get increased damage a little bit when it comes to tier 2 on the bottom path, but when it comes to the top path, it got a big damage buff from tier 3. It used to do 1210, now it does 1300, which is a pretty big change in my opinion. But if you want to go to bottom path, it's going to be 3 rounds, while if you go top path, it's 4 rounds. Because how Blast Off work is, it's kind of similar to Burning Rampage. It will detonate after 4 rounds or 3 rounds depending on the path. Also what they did was now the overtime is protected, so the enemy can't triage it right away, and it still does the extending overtime as well. So in my opinion, Blast Off did get a significant buff when it comes to just using it. Don't know how effective it's going to be though. Big change for Fire was Fire from Above, the OG Darkmoor spell that you can get for Fire that has been changed multiple times at this point, and now it's getting changed again. So what it used to do was it used to do a big hit of 960 to 1080, and it would leave a trap on the enemy. Now what it does is it does 1260, and it's no longer initial hit. Now it's an overtime that is protected, and it's going to be doing damage for 5 rounds, and it leaves a fuel essentially on the enemy. So it kind of just sets up itself. So if you hit, it will use the overtime trap, and it will do more damage. So yeah, that's perfect in its sense, but I don't know how I feel about this change. Kind of now you're gonna have to use s'mores if you want to do a big hit for Fire. Another big change that came out of the blue was Raging Bull. Raging Bull does less damage now, and instead of the minus 40 accuracy on all enemies, now what it does, it detonates 1 overtime on the enemy, and it does an increased multiplier of 1.25. So it's a little bit better than a regular detonate, and I feel like there's some combinations that can be in play for here. One I've definitely tried is Fire Dragon into the Raging Bull. It's quite effective. Don't know how many times you're going to be using that though. S'mores Machine was changed. So no longer has a 5, 6, and 7th path. The top path is just straight 5, and it's a big change when it comes to damage. It no longer does 350 at tier 3, or I mean 1350 at tier 3. Now it does 985 at tier 3. But there is more traps on the enemy now, so you can, it's a fuel trap, but it's for overtimes. So if you go to top path, it does a little bit less damage on the initial hit, but it puts 3 overtime traps that are plus 40%. But if you go to the bottom path, it does reduce the pip cost, but it puts 3 overtime traps for 15%. So in my opinion, I would still go for like the top path, but if you're going to use this in PvE, just keep tier 1. I wouldn't change it at all. Now let's get into Storm Spellments. Very Surprise got a complete overhaul and was just 100% changed. What Berry Surprise used to do, it was either going to hit the enemy or it would heal it. And depending on the path you can do, you can kind of increase your chance of it doing one or the other. So if you really wanted to go for the hit, you can go for the middle path on Berry Surprise and it would increase the chance of it doing the hit instead of the heal. And the same thing vice versa for the heal on the bottom path. So now what it completely was reworked to is now it has a School Pip and it's 2 pips as well. But if you go to the top path, it does more damage on the initial hit, but it also puts a healing to overtime. So it does both hitting and healing, which is good for setting up stuff. If you go for the bottom path, it'll still do the initial hit. It's a little bit less, but the healing over time is increased by a lot. Catalin was completely changed as well. Catalin got its damage reduced, and instead of putting a minus 25 mantle, what it does now is it puts a minus 35 weakness on the enemies. So it's kind of a good change for when it comes to PvP. I don't know how it's going to affect PvE because I don't really use the spell that often in PvE, so we'll just have to wait and see. But the damage was reduced by 40 and now it does a weakness instead. Queen Calypso got a complete change as well, so it no longer puts a windstorm on the enemies, which kind of sucks in my opinion for PvE players, because I did use this spell for certain situations, so kind of sucks. But what it does now is it puts a minus 80 infection on the enemy. The damage is increased though by 15, so that is a big buff in my opinion. So don't know how effective it's going to be for PvE now because of the infection, but we'll just have to wait and see. But for PvP players, I think it's meant to be like that to counter healing, so we'll see how it goes. Another spell was changed for Storm, and it's sad to say it, but Catch a Day finally got a nerf. Kind of sucks it got a nerf. In my opinion, it's a nerf, depending on the user, I guess. But instead of removing 2 blades, now it gives you 2 25% blades for Storm. Right now, currently in Test Realm, it gives you 2 balance blades that are 25%, but I'm assuming it's going to be changed, or the art on the card needs to be changed, one or the other. But yeah, it no longer removes 2 blades off the enemy. And the last spell that was changed was for Death. Headless Horseman completely got a change as well, so it's kind of like Evil Snowman when it comes to this ends. So if you go for the path on Headless Horseman, what it does, it gives 2 negative 35 weaknesses according to the enemy. So if you use this against an ice enemy, what it'll do, it give them 2 negative 35 ice weaknesses. So it does it depending on the enemy. So think of it as an Evil Snowman spellment. So it no longer gives the minus 45 mantle for life, which is kind of weird. But it also, the damage was kind of nerfed as well if you do the spellments. But if you are going to use base Headless Horseman, it still does the exact same damage as the old one, other than the School Pit. So just keep that in mind when you are using this, whether it be in PvE or PvP. But those are all the spells that were changed in the update. I know that there's more spells going to be changed. We did get some teas for Doom Oni being changed. Ship of Fools is going to be changed as well. So they're slowly going through the list of spells that are going to be changed, but just expect a lot of the lore spell elements to now require a School Pip. And I'll probably do a video separately of how the School Pips are going to affect everything, because kind of people are still confused on School Pips and how good they are, how bad they are, everything like that. And I feel like I should make a video just explaining that. But this is going to affect raids in my opinion, and not many people have talked about it. But I'll probably make a separate video regarding all these changes. Probably wait till like the last week maybe of Test Realm. But there's still more videos to make. So kind of wanted to put this video out there for all the people that are wondering what the spells are. And what were the changes from before and after. Because no one has really done an in-depth video like this. And it kind of makes it easier for people who just want to know what's the update without having to go to Test Realm and then just try and figure out what's the difference is. So hope you guys enjoyed. Probably will do this more whenever more spells come out. Or changed, I mean. So be on the lookout for next week. I'll probably do something similar to this whenever we see more spells changed. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. Be sure to leave a like, subscribe, all that type of stuff. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out, guys.